This is the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm the host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning, no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh Podcast is founded in the lineage of the Special Operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is sponsored by Talent War Group, an executive search and talent advisory. Visit talentwargroup.com for more. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation. On August 11th, the Chaos were given a 3.2% chance of winning the Premier Lacrosse League. They were the 6th seed going into the playoffs and were given no respect. Today, they're the 2021 PLL champions. Head coach Andy Towers joins me in the first follow-up episode of the Jedburgh Podcast. Andy and I spoke right before the start of the playoffs about what his team needed to do to make a run, his keys to building a championship team, and what it takes to be an elite coach in any sport. Today, we follow up that conversation in a discussion proving that his goal to peak at the right time was achievable. Coach Towers explains how he focused the team to play the same style of game, how he valued chemistry over raw talent and personnel decisions, the resiliency the team showed after starting the season 0-3, and how the best players prepared relentlessly for precision execution. Andy himself is a member of the United States Lacrosse Connecticut Hall of Fame, the Brown University Sports Hall of Fame, a world champion, multiple-time All-American, All-Ivy and All-New England, and the Ivy League Player of the Year. He was the 2019 Coach of the Year in the PLL's inaugural season. His team lost in the finals last year. Now he and the Chaos are the PLL champions. Coach, welcome back to the Jedburgh Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back.
You are the first repeat guest, I have to tell you. So that means, I guess, a few things. One, we've lasted long enough to be able to have repeat guests. And I guess people like what we're talking about.
Well, I'm humbled to be back on the show again, and certainly feel the pressure of being the first repeat guest. So thank you, Fran.
Well, you earned it. So when we were here last time, we did the episode right before the start of the playoffs. Yeah. And the whole point was to get you in here. Let's talk about the season at that point, and then let's set the conditions for the playoffs. Talk about all the things that have to be done. When you sat here, you had just clinched. You were in the 6th seed.
Yep.
And then right after that, the public came and said that you had a 3.2% chance to win the championship. And today, you sit here because you are the PLL champion, you and the Chaos.
Yeah, we certainly took that 3.2% narrative and had fun with it, I think. Beyond that, from the teams that you've been on, the only opinions that matter are the opinions of the people in your locker room and on your staff. And even though we perpetually used that narrative over the course of the playoffs, there was zero self-doubt coming out of our locker room. And we used the 3.2% as a little bit of a prop to probably put some pressure on everybody but us. The fact is that whether everybody thought we were going to win or no one thought we were going to win, the only opinions that really mattered to us are the guys that come to practice, the guys that wear the uniform, the guys that are in the locker room, and the people on the staff. And that's all that matters. And we didn't have any self-doubt.
Well, the best part about this was that the two teams that you beat in the quarterfinals and the semis, the Archers and the Atlas, were combined, had 50% of the vote.
Those were probably the two scariest teams offensively over the course of the summer. And I think that as fans, when they watch the PLL play, they see such incredible offensive talent in that league. It's hard to not get captivated by that. And our offense was phenomenal as well. It came together and became the most dangerous that it was, certainly in the playoffs. But our defense did not get enough credit. And you could argue that our defense was the strongest part of our team. And I think in the end, balance in all areas is something that's tough to beat and something you strive for as a coach. And I felt that ultimately we had great balance from blazing the goal through our team defense, through adds our face-off guy and our wing play, through the offensive end. And that balance and a true, genuine belief in each other that we were on a mission, I think ultimately helped us get to where we wanted to be.
Well, you told me the only goal that you had was to win the championship.
That's right.
You've achieved that goal, but you built this team with a certain identity. We talked about it in the last episode. Sure. You've talked about a little bit here. On offense, you needed this box style of lacrosse. It had to be a fast pace of play. Everybody had to play the same way. And on defense, as you brought up, and I do agree with you, I think they were severely underrated.
Yeah.
And I watched every game.
Sure.
You called that group a group of ass beaters.
Yes.
And I would argue that they went out and absolutely did that.
100%. There's no question that was an identity that them as individuals bring to the table. You know, part of putting a team together is having an idea of how you want to play and some of the characteristics that you want to take on as characteristics of the culture of your team. I think the best way to do that is to select players that have those characteristics as people. And certainly it starts with Ryan Curtis, our defensive coordinator. As a player, there was no one tougher. There was no bigger ass beater in the sport than Ryan Curtis. You know, he played at University of Virginia, National Defenseman of the Year, won a national championship there as a player, went on and played professional into lacrosse in the Major League Lacrosse, where he was the Defensive Player of the Year in that league as well, played on the U.S. national team. I mean, this is a guy that 100% should be in the National Hall of Fame. And our defense played with that edge that Ryan Curtis played with when he was a player, and certainly the edge that he coaches with. And they say that you kind of take on characteristics of your coaches, and certainly our defense took on those characteristics that Ryan exemplified as a player and as a competitor, and it was great to see.
Well, I want to ask more about that because your team is a bit different than the other teams. And we talked about it a little bit last time. It certainly has come out a lot more since you guys won a couple weeks ago, and it's been in the press. You had what really at this point everybody is calling now a potluck team, meaning that a lot of the other teams were comprised of guys who played together in different organizations. So the Whip Snakes team that you beat was mostly Maryland guys. Right. And congratulations on beating these guys really on their home turf in D.C., which I think is awesome. But you had kind of this potluck team. You got guys from Canada, you got guys from Albany. Sure. Now that you have what they've termed themselves the Kardashians of Albany. I don't know if they want to go with that moving forward too far, but okay.
Keep searching. They need to keep searching.
Yeah, bring them in here. We're going to have a conversation about that one. But you had to build this culture of really this disparate group of folks who all play differently. And this is something that I think is really critical, especially if you look at like college athletics. And I work now with Boston University and the Boston University men's rowing team. And you have all these elite athletes coming from overseas in New Zealand, Australia, Germany, and they've rowed on national teams. They're coming into one organization. But the challenge of the coach now is to get all these guys to row together, right? And that's what you face. And so I'm wondering, when you bring this group together and you start thinking about, we have to build an identity, we have to build a culture, it almost doesn't matter as much what you do, as long as you're all doing the same thing and playing the same way. So when you looked at the team and building that mindset, how did you approach it?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great conversation and a great challenge, perhaps the greatest challenge that every coach has. Finding that commonality, that binding element that creates a better group than they are a group of individuals. A little background on the league. I think when the league first announced the 6 teams, it seemed like each of the respective teams had a binding element to them, with the most prevalent one being having gone to school together. So a lot of the players on the Whip Snakes went to the University of Maryland, right? A lot of the players on the Redwoods went to Notre Dame. A lot of the players on the Chrome went to Duke. And a lot of players on the original Atlas team were U.S. World Team players, or the older version of the U.S. World Team players. And so each team kind of had its inherent identity. Our team had some guys that went to Albany, but really the rest of the locker room was individual players. And our challenge the first year was trying to manage a lack of connection that was perhaps already in place at some of these teams where a large number of players went to school together. And so we were very conscious of the fact that the first year or so, maybe that's an advantage in the short term. But as time goes on and our players get to know each other as people and as teammates and as competitors, that inherent advantage will become diluted. And I think that's the case. And I'm not saying that in the way that those teams with an existing connection going into that first season lost their connection. I don't think that's the case. I think it's our team gained its connection. And each year, obviously, you try to go out and you try to win the championship. That was our goal the first summer. That was our goal last summer in the bubble. That was our goal this summer. And you're looking for the right combinations of people. And it's a sport where the teams that are the most connected are the teams that I think have the greatest chance of becoming the best teams. And I think part of our struggle that first summer was we had so many great players, as all the locker rooms did, but we had some guys that played different styles, right? And all were great people, but we kind of had to figure out who are we on the offensive end? What's going to be our style of play? And we had on the offensive end a few more American players than we did Canadian box-styled players. And so we alternated between two different types of schemes to sort of fit the strengths of each respective group of players. And we did well. We finished the regular season as the number one seed in the tournament. We were 7-3. On the defensive end, we certainly rode the success of Blaze Reardon, who was a stud. But we also had Brody Merrill, who is one of the best players in the history of the sport, on the defensive end, with three young, really good, but young defensive players in Jared Newman and Johnny Surdick and Jack Rowlett. And we rode the strength of our faceoff guy, Tommy Kelly, who was a stud. But we peaked at the wrong time. We peaked in the middle of the summer. And we took some teams by surprise in the way that we played. It really was sort of, when this group is in, we're playing this style, and when that group's in, we're playing another type of style. And I think that kept teams off balance a little bit, but that those teams ultimately adjusted to what we were doing and beat us when it mattered most. And then we go out in the bubble, and we had made a few off-season trades. We moved some guys that were awesome people and awesome players, but we started to sort of settle in on what we thought was going to be a better fit for what we're doing. Defensively, we didn't change very much. We ended up losing Johnny Surdick on a last-minute decision by the general, who wouldn't allow him to come out to the bubble and play, and that certainly affected the dynamic on the defensive end. We were able to obviously continue to ride the great play of Blaze Reardon, the best player on the planet. We struggled in the bubble during the round-robin portion at the face-off X. We improved during the playoffs, but it was definitely, we had a tougher time in that area. And on the offensive end, we picked up a few more Canadian box players, and we were still in that offensive hybrid where when we rolled out our American line of midfielders, we played a little bit more of a scripted type offense. And when we rolled out our box-styled players, we played a little more free-flowing, allowed a little more creativity there. And that dynamic, along with a couple of personnel changes, allowed us to play our best in the playoffs last summer in the bubble. But it wasn't quite enough to win the whole thing. We ended up losing to the Whip Snakes. They won their second championship in a row, and credit Jim Stagnine and his staff and those players. They're a phenomenal team. But we had a chance to win. We were up 6-2, we were up 6-3, and still were 10 minutes away or one quarter away from winning the whole thing in the bubble after going 0-4 in the round-robin play. That accentuates how a team that is connected can become very, very dangerous very, very quickly. But we just didn't quite have enough to get over the hump. And then we made a few more off-season changes coming into this season. And over the course of the season, we started out, and we talked about this the last time I was on the pod, is that visa issues for the Canadian players that we had due to some injuries, seemingly all on the offensive end. We started the season 0-3, and over the course of the season, we knew we would be getting players back. And even though we started 0-3, we couldn't stick schematically to what we had planned to do when we were at training camp because we simply didn't have the bodies, the personnel available to run those respective schemes. So we were literally starting over offensively each game. Game 1, Game 2, Game 3, and Game 4 was the first game where we actually had enough personnel to sort of settle in schematically. And we did that. And over the course, so we win Game 4, we win Game 5. We lose Game 6 out in Minnesota. We had some injuries. And then out in Colorado, Game 7, we were in the home stretch of figuring out who we were going to be offensively. And we really settled in on a particular style of offense that fit the strengths of the personnel on our roster. And that ended up being 7 Canadians, 1 American who has a ton of box background, Mac O'Keefe, stud. And we really started to see the improvements on the offensive end. And we were able to connect that with what we thought was a finished product on the defensive end, an improving product in the middle of the field at the faceoff X, the best player in the world in the goal. And ultimately, we were able to peak at the right time and prove that chemistry is the number one most important factor as it relates to trying to win the PLL championship in this league, even if it might not be the greatest resumes on a player-to-player basis. We really prioritized chemistry over talent, so to speak, even though the difference in talent is a sliver, depending upon how you actually quantify that.
Well, and there's a couple of things that are really important here. I mean, number one, you and I were talking last week, and you said that you replaced all of the I on the team with we. Yep. And there's a really important point in this, in the decisions that you had to make as the coach, in that you actually had to replace, through the course of the season, 5 All-Stars.
Yeah, I think, well, that is correct. Or we had 5 All-Stars that weren't playing, 5 or former league All-Stars that weren't playing. You know, a few guys didn't play due to COVID. Some guys weren't available simply because of Canada's policy on returning to Canada. And we had some guys that we just didn't dress because we had found chemistry with another group. We had some guys since the inception of the league in 2019 that got traded away that were great people, great teammates, but we wanted to create a group that were all sort of playing a similar style and more of a ball movement style. And so we really had to make some tough decisions that I think at the time, people looked at those decisions and thought, wow, these guys they don't know what they're doing. They're clueless. And everybody's entitled to their opinion, but we knew where we wanted to be and we knew how we wanted to play. And whether each move was the right one or not, we certainly had conviction in what we were doing, could verbally defend every decision that we were making. It didn't necessarily mean we were making the right decision, but in hindsight now, having won the championship 10 days ago—
Who can argue with you?
You can't argue with the fact that we accomplished what we set out to do, and a huge component of what we were trying to accomplish was an egoless, selfless locker room. And ultimately, we were able to accomplish that. And I truly believe that was our greatest weapon as a team. And that was the reason that we were able to be successful during the playoffs, ultimately accomplish our goal.
I want to ask you about responsibility versus accountability, because this topic comes up in athletics, it comes up in leadership, it comes up in corporations, and really, I mean, in life and anything that you do. I define responsibility as knowing your role, knowing your job. It's the fact that you know what is being asked of you within the organization, and then what are you actually within that organization supposed to do? Where do you sit in it, and what am I supposed to do?
Sure.
Then there's accountability. And accountability is, do I accept my role? Do I accept what happens in my task, in my job? Good, bad, indifferent.
Right.
At any point in there, I'm wholly accountable and accepting of those results because everything I do is going to have a result, positive, negative. The two things combined, accountability and responsibility, create ownership.
Yep.
Ownership is something you and I talked about last time, and empowering subordinate leaders, empowering players to take ownership of their decisions, take ownership of their actions. And when you combine these things and you operate with true ownership in any organization, you've created value and you have the highest chance of success.
Yep.
When you look at the team and you look at where you went from the first game, because you lost to the first two, in the first game, you lost to the Whipsnakes,
Pounded
13-7.
Right.
I was going to say it wasn't even that close, but you end the season and you pound them. So just talk to me a little bit about that concept of ownership, how the team rallied around that, how they stepped up through the season, and then when it was time to go, right, which is like pretty much right when you and I broke here last time.
Sure.
It was go time, and it was just about execution through the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing for people to discuss that are in a team environment, no matter what that team environment is, whether it's sports, whether it's the military, whether it's business, whatever it may be. Responsibility and accountability, they're so close. I think about those two terms. I think about, responsibility is really you taking ownership for the group's success. And I think accountability is accepting your role within that respective plan. And I don't know if that's accurate or not, but that's kind of the way that I look at it. That responsibility is for the group and accountability is for yourself. And those things are critical for us. I felt that over the course of the season, we ended up with a locker room of guys that all prioritized their responsibility for the team's success and were accountable to the group and to themselves, regardless of what their role was and how that was defined. That's the trickiest part because everybody wants to win, right? Not everybody wants to win regardless of what their role is on game day. You really find out who is truly, authentically committed to the team's success when you take them out of the lineup. And I'll give you two examples, both positive examples. Tanner Cook was in the lineup, a midfielder that we drafted, a rookie midfielder, and we took him out of the lineup after he plays his best game in the quarterfinals against the Archers. He has 1 goal, 2 assists in a great win. Couldn't be a better locker room guy, couldn't be better team guy, the best. And we run into a situation where he's a lefty and we have 2 other lefties and we're only dressing 2 out of the 3. And due to the fact that he played midfield and one of the guys that we were looking at could play attack and midfield, and a guy that was returning to the lineup, Chris Cloutier, was coming back as an attackman, Cookie ended up being the odd guy out and a guy that we decided we had to sit him for the semifinal game versus the Atlas just on the chance that Chris Cloutier, an attackman, coming back into the lineup, God forbid that he gets hurt again. He was coming off an injury. If he gets hurt, being able to take KJ and put him down on attack softens that blow significantly based on the way that KJ played against the Archers in the quarterfinals. And Cookie's response to that decision was, whatever helps the team succeed, coach, I'm on board 100%. As a coach, when you get that response from a player coming out of the lineup, it just documents that the culture has reached the highest point. Everybody wants to be in the lineup, right? And in this league, if you're not in the lineup, you're not getting paid. So not only is he not playing, but he's also not getting paid. And it's a big deal, but that's his response. A rookie who had played great for us and only done everything that we asked him to do, right? The other side of that was KJ, Kyle Jackson. He's a guy that played the first 5 games of the summer for us at midfield, played great, played within scheme, did what we asked him to do. We didn't dress him out in Colorado in Game 7 because we were putting another guy in to get a look at him who hadn't played yet. Now, this is a guy we're taking out of the lineup after he'd played 5 great games for us. But in order to get conviction that we were going to put the right lineup or the most dangerous connected lineup on the field for the playoffs, we had to get a look at another guy. And what was KJ's response? I'm 100% behind this decision, coach. Whatever you think is going to give us the best chance to win, I'm all for. That's when you find out about people. It's easy to be team first when you're in the lineup. You find out who's authentically team first when you take them out of the lineup and they embrace with a broader lens the decision and are able to look past a perceived slight or something that's not what they want individually. And those are the type of people that we're going to try to fill our locker room with forever. And it's really hard because when you're looking at people in the college draft or in the players pool or trade situations, it's tough to identify that intangible accurately because you're not taking them out of the lineup yet. And so it's somewhat of a dice roll that you are taking on when you make an addition to your team because you haven't crossed that bridge yet. And everybody's going to tell you that they're that guy. Everybody's going to say, oh yeah, I just want to win. But you really find out when you take somebody out of the lineup and they're not getting what they want individually and they don't get caught up in that at all because they're able to see with a broader lens that the decision is not personal. It's what we think is for the best interest of the team reaching its goals. And it doesn't mean that we're right when we make those decisions. And so that's what I would say to that, Fran.
Yeah, I think those things are really important, especially in the early kind of life cycle of this team and this organization, because you have a chance to set a foundational culture that's going to permeate within the organization forever, as you said. If you look at an organization like the New England Patriots, I mean, how many times has Bill Belichick sat down a player who the week before was the star of the game? I mean, you saw it with running backs all the time.
All the time.
The guy goes out, he has a 100-yard game, and the next week he's not in the lineup.
Right.
Right, because it's about the matchups. It's about the play. And then the guy will come back a week or two later, he'll have another 100-yard game.
Right.
That's how you create legacy. That's how you create dynasty, because the culture of the organization is what matters above everything else.
100%.
I want to ask about the semifinal game against the Atlas, because this, I think, really propelled, at least I think in terms of the attitude of the team, I think it solidified a lot of the attitude that you saw with this team. And you can refute me. Certainly, I was only watching it on TV. You were actually there. But in my mind, you go up 4-1 in this game, and then you give up 7 straight in the second quarter. And then in the second half, you outscore them 10-1 with a 7-0 run in just the third.
Right.
And this team that you're playing in the Atlas is the number 1 seed, and they're the number 1 shooting team in the PLL. I'm really interested in the swings in this game and how you, as the coach, as the leader of this organization, kept that team focused, because it would have been so easy to just immediately think back to last year's final and say, well, here it is again. We just don't have it.
Yeah.
But the fact that that team rallied, came back, stopped the bleeding. I mean, what happened in the locker room at halftime? And I have to tell you before I let you answer is, you did a quick interview, I think, before you went in at halftime. And my daughter looked at me and she said, oh, he's going to beat their ass. And then you came back out and just dominated.
Well, listen, yeah, it was definitely a great thing for us in hindsight after the game was over and we had won, in that we jumped out to a 4-1 lead, and they were actually the number 2 seed. The Water Dogs got the 1 seed. But again, they were a very, very dangerous team and playing with a ton of confidence. But I think we were also playing with a ton of confidence. We had a great defensive game plan that Coach Curtis put together. Obviously, we were able to neutralize what was the league's most successful face-off guy when Trevor Baptiste. Ads did a great job. Blaze was phenomenal. I think for us, it was understanding how we needed to play. And everything in our locker room is a conversation. My job is to say what needs to be said to the group publicly, say what needs to be said to individuals privately. For us, in that situation, going up 4-1, we could have been up, we felt like 7-1 or 8-2 in the first quarter. We missed some shots. We missed some last pass situations in transition. And it was 4-1. We were happy to be up. But credit the Atlas, credit their coaches, credit their players. They came back and they went on a run. But they went on a run, we felt, because on the offensive end, when they stepped out to pressure us, we responded to that pressure by dodging them. And that is the best thing that you can do for a really good American defenseman, is respond to their pressure by taking them to the rack. Because any way you chop it up, whether you score or whether it's a turnover situation, it's a fast possession. And when you don't score, there's a good chance that they're going to end up with transition opportunities, odd number advantages going the other way. And that's why you saw them go on a 7-1 tear in that second quarter and go down from 4-1 to up 8-5. And we felt in our conversation in the locker room at halftime that we needed to respond to their defensive pressure with what we do best, which was short to long picks and 2-man games, which is us applying what we've practiced and what we've agreed will be the style of play to what their adjustments were. And we were able to do that. And now all of a sudden, instead of a pretty good shot in responding to their defensive pressure, we ended up with a time and space, unbelievable high quality shot, which our guys dunked. And that ultimately allowed us to go on that 10-1 run in the second half, because we just, from a rational, emotionally free point of view, said, okay, where are we breaking down? We're attacking their pressure with an emotional response instead of a mindful response. And we sort of controlled our emotions and went out and applied what we had practiced as a group in an emotionally free way, and did that one moment at a time. And didn't hurt that CJ Cospiel hit a 2-pointer, and we started to get plays in transition that we didn't get in the second quarter that we got in the first quarter. But it was really us, instead of going into the locker room and losing our mind, it was us going to the locker room and regaining our mind, and doing that through conversation, and ultimately agreed on what our plan of action was going to be. And we went and we executed.
Well, we talked a bit about that here in terms of emotional strength and being able to kind of understand the situation around you, make calm from that chaos, right? No pun intended, yeah. But just being able to kind of internalize it and say, all right, what's going on around me right now? Is this a situation where I'm going to continue to freak out and, as you said, kind of become emotional, or can I be mindful of what's happening around me and now focus that energy to actually achieving a result? And the reason why I say that I feel like that second half was so pivotal is because when you went into the final, you kind of had a similar situation. You got out to a quick lead, 4 or 5 goals, you were up, and then really quick. And this is one of the best parts about this sport. I know we talked about it before, but like these things can turn in
so
2
fast.
minutes.
Exactly.
So fast the other way. And so there really is no margin of error. There's no margin, which is enough in this sport because it can go so fast the other way. And just like that, the Whipsnakes were back in the game in the championship. But what I loved about watching the second half of the championship game was how it almost became robotic for the Chaos, where you give up a goal and then next 2 possessions later, bam, you get it back.
Yep.
And then for every one of theirs, there was like 2 coming back the other way. And there was like an element of professionalism almost. And it was like just a big like F you. Like, all right, yeah, we'll give you that goal. That's cute. But watch what I'm going to do to you. And here's 2 in your face, like boom, boom.
Yeah.
And you just saw that. And as that game got further down the line, you just saw that confidence in the team. Like, all right, yeah, that's fun. Go ahead and do that. See what happens.
Yeah. I think with the way that the Archers game played out, with the way that the Atlas game played out, the semis, what we felt is when we're hitting on all cylinders, we're a really, really tough team to beat. Yet we still, over the course of the entire summer through the end of the Atlas game, felt that we had not played 4 quarters. And that Atlas game really accentuated that point, right? We won the first quarter 4-1. We lost the second quarter 7-1. And then we beat them 10-1 in the second half. So we'd played 3 great quarters and 1 terrible quarter. And so it just created such a natural narrative for us in what we needed to think about for the 2 weeks leading up to the championship, which was we got to play 4 quarters. We haven't done that yet. And we were fortunate that it was the Whipsnakes in the finals. I said to some other people leading up to it, it had to be that team for us to really feel like we did it. And I don't mean that as a knock on the other teams in the league. Anybody can beat anybody in that league. It's unbelievably competitive. Great coaches, great players, great teams. But the Whipsnakes were 2-time defending champions. They beat everybody in the bubble and in the playoffs by an average of 6 goals. They were clearly the best team in the world for the last 2 years, without a doubt. And so it had to be them going into the championship for us to feel like, okay, we got an opportunity here to accomplish what we set out to do. But that's where our focus on the Whipsnakes stopped. And it transitioned to, this is 100% about us staying in the moment and trying to stack successful moments on top of each other with the true goal to play 4 quarters. And we felt that if we could play 4 quarters, we were going to be happy with the result, whatever that was. Clearly, you think that's winning, and it was. We won. The game at the end had its widest margin at 14-9, but I honestly did not feel that that game was in hand until 1 minute and 31 seconds left. And I looked back at my son James and I said, we fucking did it. And that's when I felt like, all right, we're up by 5 goals with 1 minute and 31 seconds. I just didn't see how they were going to be able to come back and do it. And fortunately, that was the end of the scoring, and we finished it and we accomplished it. And as happy as we were to win it, I'm just so happy for our players that sacrificed everything personally for just the chance to get it done as a team, and no guarantees. And to have that validated and to have that on such a grand stage with so many people that had followed the PLL in the summer, to see that when a group of people prioritize the group's success ahead of everything else, great things can happen. And great things happened for that group. And it validated that on every level, teamwork beats a team of individuals, regardless of the disparity in talent. And I think our guys are as talented as you're going to find. But our greatest strength, again, was that they were so selfless that they were able to come together.
And as you said, in front of the largest crowd ever at the PLL.
Yep.
On Sunday in the fall on NBC. And your son was by far the biggest fan out there. That was really awesome to see. You brought up a good point here about kind of the competition and how you view the competition. Something that I'm working with some of the organizations and teams that I work with right now today is, I call it, do you name the enemy, right? And what is the point at which you have to stop naming the competition? In a couple of weeks, we're going to interview Kristen Holmes. Kristen Holmes is VP at Whoop, the wearable. And she was also 13 years she spent as the head field hockey coach at Princeton and won 12 titles in that time. And her perspective on this is you don't name the competition because you create this allure. I think you can deal with that in professional sports. You deal with that in college sports where there are teams that have histories of success, and then you get it in your head that, oh, that's who's on the other side of the field. And it's like, no, guys, stop. Like, they put their pants on the same way you do. They play the same game, but you're putting them on this podium that may or may not really exist. And you talked about the whip snakes. I mean, you were 1-5. The Chaos was 1-5 against this team. Got your ass handed to you in the first game.
That's right.
And those cuts are deep and they last. I like that point you brought up, though, about you got to come to a point where it's not about them. They don't have a name anymore. It's now about us. Can we play our game? And how do you then focus the team on that and cut that noise out, especially young players, young organization? It is the limelight.
Yep.
It is NBC on a Sunday against week 2 or 3 of the NFL. And here they are. And it's like, guys, no, like, this is your moment. But at the same time, we got to go out and play our game.
So what our staff tried to do as it related to the communications with our players, we were constantly reminded by the media leading up to the championship on how this was a rematch from the year before and how are you going to do it this year? And you peaked at the right time last year. And every single chance that I got when I spoke to any of the media outlets or speaking to our locker room was that I would point out how different this year's team was to last year's team. Last year's team deserved the credit that they got. They went 0-4 in the bubble. They won 2 tough games in the playoffs, and they were 10 minutes from winning the PLL World Championship. But that was last year's team. I talked about how we only had 8 players that dressed in last year's championship, dressing in this year's championship. How what we did schematically on the offensive end this year was totally unique to taking advantage of the strengths of the offensive players in our locker room this year. How we didn't have specific personnel, Johnny Surdick on the defensive end, who played at an all PLL level this summer. How we had a totally different face-off group in the middle of the field. We had only 2 offensive players out of the 8 that we dress on the offensive end. Each team is different. I spoke to somebody after we won the championship that said, hey, now you got to go and repeat. And the fact is that I'm sure we will have some player turnover, whether we lose some guys, whether we get some new guys. Even if we don't, and we put the exact same people in that locker room, everybody's a year older. Different things happen. Everybody's got unique challenges. Maintaining that binding element of humility and selflessness becomes more of a challenge when you win than it does a battle cry when you lose. And it's easy when the world is saying you've got a 3.2% chance of winning the championship to use that as a narrative to take the pressure completely off our players in our locker room. We talked all along in every single game, first against the Archers in the playoffs. The pressure's on them. That's the best offensive team in the history of lacrosse. Look at everything that they're doing. They beat us the last time we played them. Same thing with the Archers or the Atlas. They beat us by 6. The pressure's on them. They're the ones that pounded us in week 6. Pressure's on Trevor Baptiste. He beat Ads 70%. Then you go into the finals. Get the 2-time world champions. Look at the players they have on their team. Maybe the 2 most prolific goal scorers in the sport, Matt Rambo and Zed Williams. And we tried to constantly promote an atmosphere where the pressure was on everybody else. And all we had to do was stay true to who we are, stay in the moment, execute what we've practiced, be authentic in your communications, and be authentic in your actions. And what happened was we ended up with a group of people that felt invincible in the end. And we only got better and better and better as the season wore on. And it culminated, crescendoed, with a 4-quarter performance against the 2-time world champions in the Whip Snakes in the final game. And we needed 4 quarters to beat that team. You could see it. We jumped up 5-2. They wouldn't quit. They're the 2-time world champions for a reason. It's an unbelievably well-coached team. It's an unbelievably balanced team. They're great in every single area, and they're unified, and they're connected, and they're scary. And they had beaten us 5 of the 6 times that we had played. It puts the pressure on them, Fran, right? It doesn't put the pressure on us. And yet, with all of that said and all of those things out there, we didn't have any self-doubt because we were authentically connected. And that's when good things can happen, and certainly good things happened.
Let's talk about a couple of the players. Max Adler, 50% face-off win percentage. Blaze Reardon, 63% save ratio. On defense, you mentioned Rowlett Surdick held the 2 previous MVPs to scoreless in the championship game. You had 4 goals for Chase Frazier. You had 4 guys with 2 goals apiece, and then Smith and Berg 1 goal apiece. It really was a total team game, as you've mentioned. One of the comments and quotes that you had in our last conversation was that, quote, "What sets you free is knowing that you put in the work proactively."
Right.
I want to ask you about something that's come out in the last week or so with regard to Jack Rowlett and his preparation for this season. And I thought that this was a really impactful and amazing story where he actually, in a very humble and mature attitude at the end of last year, accepted that he got beat.
Yep.
And said, I wasn't strong enough. I wasn't physical enough. I didn't have the size. I didn't have the skill to compete against these guys. And one of the reasons we were unable to finish the season and win that final game last year was because he gave up too much and got pushed around. And so his whole dedication and his whole mindset going into the offseason and the motivation was that final game and what happened to him. And now he puts on 15 pounds, comes back a totally different player. And the result is the Chaos win the championship, and the guys who pushed him around are held to nothing.
That's right. He epitomizes everything that we want. 0 excuses, total accountability, proactive response to controlling what's controllable. You're just not going to find many people that are so confident, but not at all arrogant, and are willing to work for everything without any guarantees that they're going to get the desired result. If that doesn't define character, I don't know what does. This is a guy that only accepts blame, never accepts credit, couldn't be less maintenance as a person. Guys trust him in everything that he does, and he completely buys in to his responsibility for his teammates' success. 100% accountable as we go back and revisit those terms, regardless of what his respective role is. And I think that along with Johnny and Jared, Surdick and Newman, Jack, you've got three of the top, 4 or 5 cover guys on the planet on one defense. And all of them could have a problem if they're not covering the top guy on the other team. Yet, none of them ever did. And I listened to an interview that Jack did, and he said that exact same thing, that with Johnny Surdick and Jared Newman back there, any one of those 3 guys can be the number one guy and could draw the top player on the other team. And they all want that assignment, but they're all 100% supportive if they don't get it. And none of them look at it as a slight if they're not getting that assignment. And that level of maturity, that willingness to be accountable to the group regardless of what your role is, again, is the most binding element in any relationship/organization.
Yeah, it's impressive. And it's impressive to watch his interviews. It's impressive to hear that story and honestly watch the play. Because talk is one thing, but actually seeing the results, and even I didn't do it, but I would imagine if you, and I'm sure you will, if you compare and actually watch the video from last year to this year, there's going to be a marked difference in that. I told you before we came in today, I was going to put you in the hot seat.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you? Let's talk about your performance for a little bit. The league starts 2019. You are, as we mentioned before, you're kind of the alternate coach coming into the league.
Exactly.
You came in because somebody else couldn't come. But 2019, you're the coach of the year. 2020, you go to the championship game. 2021, you win. Not bad for the guy who almost didn't have a job.
I appreciate it.
How are you doing? How do you evaluate yourself? I mean, how do you look at this and say like, all right, what did you do well? What do you need to work on as you look forward to next year? How do you not now become complacent? Because I mean, that is a phenomenal first 3 years. And I would tell you that every other coach in that league is looking at you and saying, shit, I wish I had that.
Well, I appreciate you saying it. I do. I honestly, when I look at myself as the coach, I look at my staff. I mean, it's Ryan Curtis is our defensive coordinator. Matt Panetta is our offensive coordinator. I'm the head coach in title. But the reality is everything is a discussion between us 3 and with our locker room. We may lean on a small group of specific players more so than we do the entire locker room at times. But every decision that we make is the decision made by the group. And when I first came into this league, I kind of looked at this and thought, okay, what's my value here? What's our value as a staff here? We're not going to teach these men skill development. They're the most skilled players in the world, more skilled than we ever were as players. You're not going to teach them IQ. They already know what the right decision is based on what the situation is and based on what their respective role is within that situation. They're the best athletes in the world that play our sport. And so where's the value? The value is trying to get these guys connected as a group when you're managing a group of people that don't have a built-in connection with a built-in hierarchy, so to speak, in specific areas of the field, offensively, defensively, whatever it may be. And so what we tried to do is set the tone from day one that this is our common goal. We all agree that the only goal that we have is to win the championship. And how do we work towards doing that? I think you got to say what needs to be said, again, to the group. If you have an issue with somebody, you got to address that proactively and tactfully. You've got to be conscious of evolving schematically so that the teams that you're playing in the next game see something different on game day than they've seen on film leading up to that game. You've got to manage personalities in the locker room with the goal of getting everybody connected and staying connected, but it has to be authentic. And you got to be consistent in your communications and consistent with the decisions that you make so that you can't be viewed hypocritically. And you got to realize that no matter what you do or you say, there's always going to be a few people that think you're making a mistake or treating them unfairly, slighting them in some way. And as I say to these guys every single year and all the time throughout the year, we do not care who plays. We are going to put our game day rosters together with the sole goal of trying to win that game. And each spot on the roster, we will be able to justify verbally on why that guy is in that spot. And if you have 25 on the roster and you're dressing 19, in a perfect world, the 6 guys that you don't dress respond to you in the way that Kyle Jackson responded to us, the way that Tanner Cook responded to us. But real life, it doesn't work that way. There's always going to be a few guys that feel like you slighted them. And you know what? That's what the offseason is for. You can put guys in the players' pool. You can make trades. Guys decide it's not worth the time and energy and effort to be a part of it. And we will never bend on our mission to prioritize what's best for the team, regardless of who thinks they're getting slighted at times. I don't give a shit about the people that take those decisions personally. It's never personal. And I'm not saying people should be happy about coming out of the lineup. I'd be pissed if I was in the lineup. And I was pissed when that happened when I played professionally. But as a coach, I've only said one thing from the beginning, and that's we don't care who plays. We're going to commit ourselves to the people that are 100% team first, regardless of what their role is on game day. And that will always be the case as long as my staff and I are coaching chaos. It'll never change because that is what I consider the number one greatest determining factor of outcome. And that is a player to player, player to staff, connected locker room.
You won the championship. And I tell everybody that I work with that no one cares what you did yesterday, that we can be proud of it. We can learn from it if we made mistakes. Certainly embrace the moment and be thankful and grateful for our victories. But the reality is that it's now in the past. We say on the podcast, I say in all organizations, how you prepare today determines success tomorrow. You talked about the off season. You've got 8 months, and then you're back out there. What's the focus now for you and the team?
Well, it's a new team. It's a new challenge. And it's the same goal is to win the PLL championship with the 2022 Chaos Lacrosse Club. What is that team going to look like? We're going to identify areas where we think we can get better. We're going to manage our roster that way. There will be changes from the front office in the way that the coaches have to put their teams together. There's a lot of variables that make each season totally unique. And the 2021 Chaos Lacrosse team accomplished its goal. But we go into next season with the 2022 Chaos Lacrosse Club. And it's going to be a totally unique opportunity to that specific group with unforeseen variables that will come into play that can derail our only locker room goal. And we'll manage those hurdles proactively, authentically, cumulatively, and we'll never sacrifice what's best for the team on the account of an individual at any point in the process. And so that's what's next for us.
There's 4 things that you told me were going to be required for this team to win the championship. I want to throw them out. We threw them out in our last conversation, and I kind of wanted you to give me like the 2 to 3 sentence, how'd you actually achieve it? And what was the result? And the first one is stick to the process.
Stick to the process refers to don't let short-term hurdles derail us from what we've all agreed is the long-term path to the goal. And every team, every group has their challenges. And we certainly had ours over the course of the summer. But we didn't let a quarter of digression from plan cost us the Atlas game. We used it as a tool to challenge ourselves to put together 4 complete quarters in the next game, which is what we needed to beat the 2-time champions in the Whip Snakes. And that's what that means.
Or the 0-3 start.
100%.
Chemistry trumps talent when it came to this team.
We have a lot of unbelievable players in our locker room. Many future Hall of Famers on the highest level. But regardless of those resumes, team chemistry is our number one goal. In a perfect world, you reach complete team chemistry with your most talented players. But if that's not the case, we will prioritize team chemistry over talent when we're putting our rosters together every single time.
Sell your soul between the lines. Leave it all on the field.
Don't get beat in the areas that are effort, toughness, and competitive spirit related. Communication at both ends of the field. Getting 50-50 ground balls in the middle of the field. Riding with 10 people. Clearing with 10 people. Having tough conversations proactively. Teammate to teammate, staff to teammate, player to staff. Anything that is a decision, make the decision, address it, come to common ground, put it behind you, and eliminate those as reasons why you wouldn't accomplish the respective goal.
And you saw that in the attitude of the team.
100%.
In every game.
100%.
The last one is when you talk about there's nothing better than punching the bully in the face. And the Whip Snakes were that bully. And you smacked them.
Yeah, again, they're the 2-time defending champions for a reason. They're the best team on the planet the last 2 summers. And the pressure was not on us. The pressure was on them. Any way you chopped it up, the pressure was on them. And they had a much tougher challenge coming into this game than we did, as long as we didn't have any self-doubt in our locker room. So our feeling is always going to be, we're going down swinging. If you're going to beat us and you're going to knock us out, you're going to get a black eye. That's just the way it's going to be. And so we made sure that we eliminated any regret proactively in all facets of the game and did it one possession at a time and stayed present. And the end result was we got what we were looking to get. But it was not easy, and we needed everything, all 4 quarters, to do it. And fortunately, it paid off.
I call it earning the respect, because when you come in a position that you were, I'm sure that the Whip Snakes respected your ability to play, but there was probably an element in their mind that said, yeah, we got this. We've done this. And you had to go out there and you had to prove it, and you had to make them, if they were going to beat you, as you said, they had to earn it, and nothing was going to be given to them. And that mindset, when you compete, like when you think about the word competition and you think about your position and your ability to go out there every day and compete, you compete for yourself. But there's an element of true competition when you are at the most elite level and you're operating with everything that you have, that you are now forcing your competition to take it from you. And so it's not necessarily about Do I give it to them? It's that if they're going to beat me, it's going to take everything they have.
100%. One of the things that we said throughout the playoffs and certainly leading up into that championship game was make them have to manage us. Make them have to deal with what we do. And we knew we were a totally different team going into the final game than we were in the first game of the season when we played them in week 1. And yes, they had the confidence of winning the last 2 championships. And yes, they came back from a big hole to beat us last year in the championship. But that was last year. And that was 2019. And that wasn't this group. This group was totally different. Why? The pressure was on them, and we're hitting on all cylinders. And we were playing our best game after game after game. We kept playing better and better and better and better. And that last step going into the final game, our last challenge was to play 4 quarters instead of 3 or 3.5. And that was our primary focus, was on us. And even though they were the 2-time champions, we needed to just go out and stay in the moment and win small situation after small situation after small situation and stack those things and realize it's not going to go perfect. And it didn't, but it was the best that it had ever been over the course of the summer and down the stretch of the playoffs. We played the best that we've played in 3 seasons.
Coach, a couple of weeks ago, I asked you what the 3 things were that you do every day to be successful personally. And in every episode, I caveat this, right? The Jedburghs in World War II, they had to do 3 things every day to be successful in their world. If they focused foundationally on these 3 core tasks, then it didn't matter what other challenges came their way. They could address and focus their effort on solving those more complex challenges. And that was because they could shoot, they could move, and they could communicate. You gave me your 3 last time. I'm interested in what are the team's 3? And as you look at the offseason right now, to prepare the foundation for success in 2022, what are the 3 things that the team has to focus on in the offseason to be successful?
First thing would be, don't forget how important it is to stay connected as people first and as teammates second. That in the end, this team won because they were soldiers to each other's successes. That would be number 1. Number 2, next season is a totally new and unique, different opportunity. And the challenge for all of us, players and staff alike, is to not lose sight that we're responsible for our teammates' success and we're accountable to the group regardless of what our role is on game day. And the last thing would be to have fun, enjoy being able to play the sport with and against the best players in the world and get paid for it. I want these guys to realize that time flies and that it's not going to last forever and to take advantage of every moment they have.
Don't forget the importance of the connection. Next season is a new season. It's a new opportunity. And have fun.
That's it.
Coach, you achieved your goal. The goal is to win the PLL championship. You did it. You and the Chaos are champions. I couldn't be more proud to watch, to get to know you through this process, to follow this story, to tell this story, to have you back on and be able to tell the follow-up. But I got to ask, did you break the trophy?
Look, Fran.
Who is accountable?
Listen, we won the trophy as a team. We broke the trophy as a team. We're going to have to go win another.
Coach, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for your time, Fran. It was so much fun. Love hanging with you. Love your angle on things. Appreciate what you do.
We'll see you next time. We'll see you next year. American Jedburghs went on to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Directorate of the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your host, Fran Racioppi. We're brought to you by the Talent War Group, an executive search firm and talent advisory. We'll drive you to attract, retain, and develop top talent. With services like talent acquisition, leadership development, and keynote speeches, we work with you to create talent solutions to business problems. To get started, visit talentwargroup.com. Join us next week for a new episode of the Jedburgh Podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, the Talent War Group, and the Jedburgh Podcast on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast and the Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.